I have occasion to be around a lot of people in a lot of different traditions, Catholic among them, and what I find without fail are wonderful people with a wonderful heart for the Lord, and it just grieves me for them to be in fear, and again, how does a person deal with that tradition that is so established? I mean, it's not just established in their own hearts and understanding. It's a family tradition that involves actually alienating yourself from your family to move away from it. I'm not sure how we are supposed to deal with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, within Catholicism and within any tradition that honors oral teaching alongside the Bible, there's a trump card right there. Because, if I come to you and I say, well, the Scriptures, which were written by the apostles, say nothing of this idea. Let's take purgatory, for example. I say to you, Chip, if you go through Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, all of the New Testament, written by the very people that saw Jesus, touched Jesus, were with Jesus under His teaching, they don't mention purgatory one single time. And then you say, well, yeah, that's because it was just part of the oral tradition. Well, see, then immediately, I have no response to that. It's a trump card. You have trumped me, and you can't prove that it was part of the oral tradition, and I can't disprove that it was part of the oral tradition. But isn't it interesting that something as important as purgatory fails to show up in any single letter to any New Testament church? I mean, you would think that if all your loved ones and relatives might not go to heaven, but might instead go to this other place for a while, that Paul or Peter or James or John or somebody might mention it in a letter to a church. But no, it's not there anywhere. And so when anyone comes up with this idea, this new idea, this special theology, and then you confront them and say, well, but it's not in the Scriptures, and they say, well, but it's oral, well then, again, what do you say about that? So it's basically an intellectual trump card that enables anyone to say anything. I could say that Jesus walked across the Atlantic Ocean and preached to the American Indians, and he did that during his 32nd year of life before he died on the cross, et cetera, et cetera. And you could say, well, how do you know? And I could say, well, it's just been passed down. And so with that statement, it sounds very sort of, oh, church history, this guy really knows church history. But if it's oral, there's no history of it. I mean, that is the bottom line, and it becomes a trump card. And it's not just the idea of purgatory. It's anything. It's anything that we do today that is not in the epistles. We are pulling it out of thin air, and there's all kinds of jargon. I could go on to talk about a two-tiered system of forgiveness. Well, God forgives you in heaven, but daily you need to ask for forgiveness. There's patriarchal forgiveness and forensic forgiveness, and then there's actual forgiveness once you ask for it, and all of that is nonsense. And then a new thing is there's positional truth, and then there's experiential truth, and you can't really experience positional truth until you appropriate it. And see what this is? This is intellectual assumptions and intellectual terminology, and basically what many Christians have done is they have taken academia and the Christian life, and they've put them together, and they believe that an academic approach to Christianity is the be-all and end-all of Christian experience, and that's why we are allowing a lot of error to creep into the church today, because if the guy up front has a PhD, if the guy up front has been to seminary, if the guy up front is successful at academia, he must be right. Well, guess what? The New Testament was written by fishermen. I mean, the New Testament was written by people that didn't have this schooling. Now, Paul is the exception. He was schooled in Jewish thought, but it was his road to Damascus experience and his being tutored by the risen Christ for 14 years in the desert that enabled him to author the New Testament. It wasn't that he was taught by another person and then placed his thoughts in a little blue notebook and then got tested on it and then got his degree and then was qualified to teach the Scriptures. And so, I have a PhD in linguistics and I'm successful in academia, but I can tell you that has zero to do with my understanding of the gospel. In fact, the gospel is an assault on the human ego. The gospel is an assault on intellectualism because the gospel is for little kids to understand. I mean, the gospel is basically your sins are all gone. Your relationship with the law is all gone. Your old self is all gone, and you're a new creation. The obstacles between you and God are all gone. And then the intellectual comes in behind and says, well, do you mean positionally? Or do you mean forensically? Or do you mean patriarchally? And so there we see the terminology, and the pride begins.